really need to get together and let our voices be heard.
This is Buffalo What's Next. I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Jaipal Valenza.
I'm Dave Debo.
And I'm Thomas O'Neill White.
After May 14th, how can we afford not to talk about race?
About education, about segregation, about humanity.
Since the dawn of this nation, racial violence has existed.
The way we have designed our society has a big hand in what occurred in that Tops Market.
The suburban area, everywhere, we must work and teach our children.
We need to make sure that we put more funding in our programs that help prevent gun violence and more money into art.
If we're going to have some real healing, we've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truths.
And good morning. Welcome to Buffalo What's Next. My name is Jay Moran, and our guest in this first portion of Buffalo What's Next is Jason Daniels. He is the Senior Legal Counsel for Catholic Health. Good morning to you, Jason.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us and giving us some of your time and perspective as well. Jason, we should tell you, is a young attorney. He's been at this business only for for some of us a relatively short period of time, and professionally. Jason is also a black man who grew up here in Western New York as well, and because of that, you're in places right now when it comes to with the Catholic Health leadership team, or any other place for that matter, when you get involved with leadership, one of the few people of color, correct?
Yeah, no, there's not many, and I think you see that kind of throughout not only all the organizations, but in healthcare.
Yeah, it's a reasonable thing, and I guess for you, it's something that you experienced as you were going through college and through your education. You have an MBA as well, plus your law degree. I mean, that's something you saw early on.
Oh yeah. Being in college, as soon as you get to like junior, senior year, you just don't see many people that look like you. And then, in law school, there's not a ton. And in business school, there's even fewer. So it's like you kind of start to get the idea of, if these are the schools that feed these kind of jobs, that there's not a lot of people like me doing these kind of jobs. So it's like you just start to prepare yourself mentally. And, you start to realize this is what this looks like.
Can you take us through that a little bit? Like you said, prepare yourself mentally. I mean, that's easier said than done. I wake up every morning trying to prepare myself mentally for things, and I look back at the end of the day, and whatever I prepared for didn't come to fruition, and I didn't change. But what about for you? How did you, like you said, prepare for those challenges that were ahead that you knew were going to be coming?
Yeah, you just look at it. I mean, for me, kind of growing up, I didn't, I wanted to be a lawyer because I saw it on TV. Like, I watched a lot of court TV, and it became interesting to me. But, coming up, I didn't know any lawyers or really have any experience and everything. It was just kind of, what I had seen. And, when I got to college, there were people, and you could just tell, there were people who, had parents who were lawyers, and, had different people who were in different professions, and they had some of that guidance. And myself, I kind of just, figured it out on my own. And, I found good mentors, as I got further on and I got into law school and stuff. But early on, it was like, just trying to navigate and to try to figure out, what this looks like.
So you had no specific role model, so to speak, as you were making your way along this journey?
Not really. Yeah, it was just kind of like, this is what I want to do. I think I could be good at it. These people seem to do well financially. That was a goal of mine. And, I just kind of pushed forward. And, really as I got older and as I, got more school behind me and everything, I started to really get a better idea of, okay, this is good. And this person, this person looks like somebody who, I should talk to or do something with and everything. But a lot of it really came organically.
What makes a good lawyer? What makes a good somebody who does your kind of work?
There's differences, right? So, there are some lawyers who are, trial lawyers, and there's courtroom lawyers, and, there's a specific skill set to do that. For me, kind of being more of an in-house corporate guy, it's really about people skills, and it's about relationship building, and it's about being able to relate to all kinds of different people and, have conversations and build trust.
Let's go through your journey just a little bit, if we could, and talk about some of the things that you experienced. Obviously, we hear about it on so many levels of society about the difficulty it can be for people of color in lots of things, especially in a community like Buffalo that has a high level of segregation. What about your journey along the way? What can you share with us that wasn't necessarily all that easy?
Yeah, so some things like, I remember first becoming a lawyer, and, I would go into meetings with, my paralegal, who was an older white woman, and, everybody would assume she was a lawyer, and I was just, and that went on for like a month or so. And then, people kind of start to get to know you and everything. But, you have other situations. Like, I had a situation, this was some years ago, where, we had a meeting. I forgot what the meeting was about. But after the meeting, I was having a conversation with another employee about a football game or something like that. And, a more senior lawyer who was, an older white woman pulled me to the side afterwards and told me that I didn't speak in a way that, she felt represented the organization well. And for me, that was one of the first kind of moments where that kind of happened directly. So it kind of set me back a little bit. But then, you have to kind of, take inventory of the situation, right? Like I'm, a young black man and I'm in this department where, our boss was a white woman and there's all these other, everybody in the department's either a white woman or, an Irish man. And, if I, get into it with this woman or something like that, is it worth it? And
Sure.
And how's it going to go for me? And, sometimes you run into those situations where people say things that are off-putting. Like, for example, I wear earrings. And early in my practice, people would, call it out or say something and everything. And it's just like, you kind of have to laugh some stuff off that maybe you don't necessarily think is funny.
Yeah. Just curious, back to that conversation about football. You said that, but what specifically was it? Just the way, just a couple of guys talking about a game and just the way the passion of it all?
I have no idea. But,
really?
We were just talking about the game and talking about some players and stuff like that and everything. And I forgot exactly what the conversation was. But, evidently she didn't like the way I said something or something I said. We certainly, weren't using any profanity or anything like that. But it was just, that was a person who, she came from another law firm where it also, I don't think they ever had any employees of color or anything like that. And she came in and she was a little older and you could tell she was a little older school about things. And, she just had, weird ways. But for me, it was offsetting because, at that time I was a person, I'd been a lawyer for some time for, at least a few years and, went through law school and went through business school. And I'd been, involved in all kinds of meetings and everything. And nobody had ever told me, the way you speak isn't proper for, for this organization. So it was like.
Yeah. What about expectations? As you were talking about that, I was thinking, when a man of color walks into a room, a professional room, or wherever, it doesn't have to be there, it can be, but what about that? Do you have a sense of people's expectations? They see you and they're, then all of a sudden they may expect you to be something that you are not. Do you ever get that kind of a reaction?
Not so much, especially early on, I would get it would seem like people were surprised.
Okay.
I was there because I was, a pretty young guy and everything, but that would happen a little bit. I don't necessarily know about expectations. I know for myself, my expectations of myself, I have a lot of, white friends who are lawyers and, we talk about career and expectations and stuff like that and everything. And I always feel like they're a little more at ease than me. For me, I'm not necessarily uptight. I've been doing my job for a while. I feel like I'm really good at it, but there's always kind of this, I think some people call it imposter syndrome, where it's you feel like, this could end any time or something could happen. And you just, you feel like you have to be more careful than I feel like other people do.
Okay.
And, sometimes it's a little limiting because, you'll see an opportunity or something like that and everything. You'll have to, kind of dial it back in your head. While I feel like other people just feel like, oh, I'm supposed to be here. So this is supposed to happen.
Wow. But yet you've been able to deal with that. Can you take us through how you, again, go about dealing with that sense that that maybe you can't proceed quite as aggressively or as naturally as maybe other people can?
Yeah. I think at this point, I've been at it for long enough where
it's just part of who you are.
Yeah. And it's just kind of a what happens things. I operate under proceed until apprehended at this point. So it's I just keep going further and I do the best work that I can do. And, I try to surround myself with people who I know are good people. Right now, I'm in a situation at Catholic Health where my boss is a really good friend of mine, and our CEO is a really good guy. And there's a lot of people who I know support me and support what we're doing. And I always when I'm looking at opportunities and when I'm figuring out what I'm going to do next, that's really important to me. I always identify, I'm I need to have a boss who's a person that I connect with, who's a person that I like and I know is going to support me so I feel comfortable, being me and proceeding and everything because, you hear horror stories about people who end up in really bad situations. Sure. And I'm just I've gotten to the point where, my kind of peace of mind is more important than making a little more money and being in a different position. So I've just, I've just gotten to the point where, it's really first it's about like the people, and then it's about, okay, this is the job that I like and everything.
Proceed until apprehended. I'm going to take that and steal that from you. That is a memorable phrase right there for sure. Jason Daniels is our guest here on Buffalo What's Next. He's the senior legal counsel at Catholic Health. What about from learning through the legal system? And lawyers, I think you would agree with me, once trained, think differently than other people, right? People who aren't attorneys. You go through a process of how to think about things, how to think about issues. Has that helped, do you think, in like what you're talking about right here, of prioritizing, of knowing where your lines in the sand have to be when it comes to these types of relationships? Yeah,
a little bit. Some of it's that. The other thing is just like learning how to read people. For years, like when I was in college, and I waited tables and I bartended a little bit, and you get to be around different kinds of people, and you learn how to read people a little bit, and I feel like, especially in my line of work, like working in-house with a large organization, it's really about just building relationships and just kind of knowing, what goes over with who, and, who kind of feels a certain kind of way, and playing to that a little bit. I think maybe playing to it is a bad characterization, but just understanding how to deal with certain kinds of people.
Right.
And realizing that, some people you have to meet them where they are, because they're never going to be, where you want them to be, but you engage with them in a certain way anyways, and just knowing how to have those conversations and relate to people, and some people you find common ground, right? Like some people you really don't have anything in common with, so you think about the basic things, right? Like we both like football, or we both like plays or traveling or just kind of whatever, and you just really build relationships off of those commonalities.
People use the term microaggressions when it comes to dealing with racial issues and such. What about for you? When you hear that term microaggressions, what do you think about?
Oh, it happens all the time.
Really?
And the thing is, so, it's not all intentional. Sometimes it's just, somebody who's never spoken to somebody who looks like you before, or, isn't comfortable, and things like that. And I think, at least the way I operate is, I try to create a safe space for people to, I don't take myself super seriously. So, if I'm having a conversation with somebody and it's not somebody that I'm familiar with, I just try to make them understand that, it's a safe space. So, if you say something that's not, that's not something that's proper, or something like that and everything, like I'll tell you about it, but it's always in a friendly way, and very seldom professionally at least is there something malicious.
Sure.
There's been a couple small situations where there've been things that I felt was malicious, but most of the time it's just misunderstandings. And I think there's two ways you can handle it. I've seen people take those little small misunderstandings and make huge ordeals out of them and really blow things out of proportion. But the other way, which I think is the better way, to really just use those as teachable moments, and educate and talk through things, and build relationships in that way, because ultimately once you take it out of proportion, people go back into their into their shells, and you don't get anywhere.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach to it, and you would probably know well enough that not everybody would take it quite that way.
Oh, not at all.
Yeah.
And I think especially with what you've seen over the last couple of years, with really there's been a really big push in things like DE&I, and after George Floyd, and just a lot of what's going on, you see like a really big push, and people are getting kind of really aggressive right away. And that's just not an approach that works with everyone. I mean, you got to think about it. A lot of these people, right or wrong, they've operated in a professional environment where there's only been people that have looked like them in certain spaces for 30, 40, 50 years. So to expect that because this one thing happened, everybody's going to automatically change tomorrow, it's not appropriate, and it's not reasonable. So obviously people who have certain beliefs that are inappropriate, they have to change things, and they have to, really think about, who they are or what they're presenting, especially in the workplace. But I think you kind of have to meet people where they're at a little bit, and like bring them along, instead of expecting everybody to be exactly where you are from day one.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting about microaggressions. You've nodded very quickly at the affirmative that you understand it. And our listening audience, it seems to me, this particular program has really resonated with them in a lot of ways. And if you wouldn't mind sharing what when it comes to microaggressions, if you wouldn't mind sharing maybe a couple of examples, because again, I think we have a lot of people who, since May 14th especially, want to make a difference. They want to make a difference. They want to make a difference in how they deal with people and how they can help this community move forward. What about some of those things that you've experienced that this is something that happens a lot, and you'd rather not see it happen, and you can understand maybe how others take things a little more offensive, a little bit more.
Absolutely. I mean, the one, I think the low hanging fruit one that happens all the time is when they introduce people of color to leadership positions. They immediately say, how well they speak, or they present themselves really well, or it's like, they're like compliments, but they're not compliments that they give to, every other, white man or woman that's ever been in that role. And I see that all the time. And that's like one thing that I immediately call out. I'm like, well, have we ever done it? Like, do we do this in other, like, why do we feel the need to say that this, master's educated person speaks well? Obviously they speak well, right? Like, those kind of things, a lot of the things, especially when dealing with women of color, the hair, there's like, just comments like that, and not necessarily malicious comments, but like, assuming because, black woman has straight hair that she's Indian or something like that, or, just, assuming that every, black man over 6 feet plays basketball, like,
right.
Just things like that, or listens to rap music, or just, things like that I think come from a good place and maybe come from uncomfortability, but it's not necessarily the kind of comment that you would make towards, a person of a different color or background.
What advice would you have to a white person, again, this type of person who, just, wants to go about doing things the right way, but they're older or whatever, they've lived in, like you said, mainly places of non-color throughout their days, and, between education and workplace and such. What about that? What thoughts, what would you like to see building relationships in that regard? What do you think could help?
Well, I'd like to say, first and foremost, the fact that they're thinking that way is like a big step in the right direction, right? Because there are a ton of people who couldn't care less about this and, really have no interest in changing the way they think or anything like that. So, the fact that a person's forward thinking and like, has those thoughts in the first place is really good to begin with. One of my really close friends, who was my original boss from a couple jobs ago and a great mentor of mine, her and I are really good friends. We, hang out, have dinner and stuff like that and everything. And, she's a 64-year-old white woman and I'm, a young guy. And, one thing that we connected on is she was just always really forward thinking. And she understood that she grew up in a time long before where things were different, but she was really open-minded and really kind of willing to accept that, things have changed and understand that. And I think just kind of, keeping your ears open and understanding things. And then also just trying to, when people give you feedback, not necessarily taking offense to it, especially if the feedback is respectfully given, but also just kind of thinking about, purposefully thinking about the things you say and why you're saying them, right? Like, when you're writing an introduction for a new employee who's a person of color, right? Look at the introductions you've written for employees before. And, if there's a big difference, why? Why is that? Why am I saying this and I didn't say this before? And it takes work because those aren't, things that we naturally do, because I think we all come kind of hardwired with, stereotypes and assumptions and things like that. Like there's times where, I'll look at a person and I'll assume something because of the way they look or how they are. And that, assumption isn't correct at all. One thing I think about all the time, like, kind of, being a younger guy, on the weekends, you go into work to pick up, papers or something like that. And you're dressed in whatever you wear on the weekend. And the thing about, being a lawyer, it's like when you're in a suit or you're dressed up and everything, people look at you a certain way.
Right.
But, when you're in sweats and stuff, it's like, it's different. And I've had some interesting interactions with, security and with, different people and stuff, just kind of off hours, come up to the office and pick stuff up. And those aren't the same kind of interactions that, my white counterparts have had. So it's just kind of getting through some of those things also.
Wow. Jason Daniels with us from Catholic Health. He's their senior legal counsel, and we're having a great conversation. It's interesting also in this regard, Jason, that you, as you mentioned, in the last couple of years, these issues when it comes to race have become at the forefront, and deservedly so, in workplace environments for sure. And you're a part of the leadership team at Catholic Health that's involved in the diversity and inclusion work that's going on inside the company. Talk about the approach.
Yeah. So I'm the program lead for that program, and it's been really good. It's actually gone a lot better than I thought it would in the beginning, but it's because our CEO and a lot of people really support what we're doing. But so first and foremost, we've put the program in place, and we've built committees at all the hospitals, and we started to try to just be more involved in the community and work with schools, and just do different things to make people feel more included. We presented orientation and let new employees know kind of what we're doing and everything. We try to have programming and education and training and things like that, and we've done some really good things. Like this year, Catholic Health participated in the Pride Parade, which is like the first time that's ever happened. And people.
And what was the reaction to that?
So the reaction from our associates and our leadership was overwhelmingly positive.
Okay.
But we have a lot of folks within the organization and attached to the organization who are religious, and that's against their faith. And there was some pushback in that area, where we did get some negative feedback that went to some of the churches and some of the different things. And at that point we had already done it, and it was like, can't unring the bell now. But it was afterwards, kind of dealing with some of that blowback. It's like you realize that you can't go 1,000 miles an hour to do everything.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, again, when we talk about the Catholic religion, obviously a religion that's steeped in historic tradition. Yep. Things don't change very easily. But do you see that, though, that the organization itself, though, has really made some strides in that regard? Yeah. Especially everybody's trying. Like, that's the thing. The biggest thing is there are definitely some areas where we would like to be further than where we are. But ultimately, everybody's supportive, and everybody's trying, and everybody's kind of on board, so to speak. But it's just it's just managing what on board looks like for different people, and it's really just managing through some of the hospital. I think Sisters Hospital is like 100 years old. Right. So it's there's just a lot of people who think a certain kind of way, and it's about it's about bringing everybody on at the same time so you don't lose people. Because ultimately, if you go, 1,000 miles this way and, everybody was like, oh, that's too far, or we're not quite ready for that now, then you lose a ton of people, right? And if you don't have everybody on board, then you don't really have a program. You just have a few people kind of doing stuff. So, one of the really tough things to manage has just been going at the right pace for everybody, and just kind of, keeping everybody in the loop. Like, I feel like, you over communicate things, and you just try to, get people on board and make people comfortable with what we're doing. But, the one thing that I'll say, even from, folks from the diocese and, folks in our leadership and everything, like, everybody's supportive, and everybody's been involved, and everybody, is really supportive in doing this. And if you would have asked me before I joined the organization, if that would have been the case, I don't know if I would have told you yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay, it's interesting. And what about maybe on a broader perspective? And obviously, you're only really familiar when it comes to your particular organization and your efforts, but overall, what you're seeing in the workplace landscape when it comes to diversity and inclusion, what's your sense? Yeah. So I see three different kinds of organizations, right? There's organizations who aren't doing anything at all, and it's just not a part of it. I see organizations who have like one employee, right? They pick said black person, make them chief diversity officer, and throw them into the pool. And many times that person's like the only person of color in their leadership team. And it's like, go do stuff, right? And that generally doesn't work. And then there's other organizations that, ours is definitely less mature in that area, but you see like M&T. They have, a really good program, and, Glenn Jackson over there, he's really good, and they do a lot of stuff and get a lot of people involved. But organizations that really try to engage lots of different people from different places in the organization and really kind of make it more of a team effort than a one person pushing it, or than we're not doing anything at all, our culture's fine. So, those are the three different things that I see. And, I think it's more of a Buffalo thing because, I have friends that live down in Atlanta, live in D.C., live in different places, and they are light years ahead of us to some extent. There are some organizations in those places too who are also like, we don't care about that either. So, you get, it's a mixed bunch. It's interesting you bring up Atlanta. We had a conversation a while ago with Madison Carter, who was here for some time as a reporter, and she moved to Atlanta. And one of the conversations I brought up is, talk about the differences with Atlanta and Buffalo, and she reflected a lot of what you just mentioned there. But I'm curious, for a guy like you, you're a professional. You're obviously moved ahead in your field very quickly. Is there an attraction to go to a place like Atlanta or Washington?
For me,
Yeah.
no, because I'm a Buffalo guy.
Good.
And like I love Buffalo, and it's just, it's just where I am. But the one thing, I'll say, I have relatives that live in Atlanta and everything. And the one thing that, that really, really, really is great in those places that we don't have here is you go to those cities and you see neighborhoods, affluent, Black and, Hispanic, and like you just see full neighborhoods with people of color, right? And they're affluent and they're nice neighborhoods. And it's almost surprising because, being from Buffalo,
Sure.
if you go to a nice neighborhood, it's a mostly white neighborhood. I live in Williamsville, and, Williamsville, you don't really have many Black neighbors, right? It's just how it is. So to go other places and to be like in nice areas and to see lots of people that look like you, it's like, wow, like this is great. But for me, the thought process is always, I would love to have this in Buffalo, not necessarily I want to come here for this.
I'm interested. I want to get into this in a little bit because you can bring a lot of different perspectives, both from your personal journey and also, of course, your legal background and knowing the law. First of all, just when it comes to Buffalo and what has kept it back, what do you see? What do you think?
So, there's a lot of things. Buffalo's incredibly segregated, just as far as the way it's split up and everything. But also, it's about like opportunity. It's about the education you get, and you live in certain places. Like, for example, when I was a little kid, I went to School 37, which is right over in the Fruit Belt and everything. And I went there to about second or third grade, and then from there I went to Cheektowaga Central, which is like first ring suburb school, not like Williamsville or Clarence, but a better school. And I remember going from 37 to Cheektowaga Central, like I felt like I missed a grade.
Really?
It was like there was such a difference in what they were teaching at one school than the other. And
were you ready for it? Were you ready for it personally at the time?
Well, I was a kid, so
But you know what I'm saying. But I'm just saying, like, I mean, were you? Did you go up to speed very quickly, or did you struggle a little bit?
It took me a couple years.
Yeah.
Like really, when I was at 37, as a kid, I've always been a really good student and got really good grades and stuff like that. And I went from being like an honor roll student to like just kind of barely making a student for a little while. And after a couple years, it clicked in and it worked, and I ended up doing really, really well.
Right.
But there was definitely a gap. And, at the time, I didn't understand this because I was a kid. But looking back, I think to myself, like, that could really frustrate somebody. Or, if somebody really, doesn't have the aptitude or doesn't have the support at home that I fortunately had and everything, it could be something that could really derail you. And kind of later on, Cheektowaga Central became more of a diverse school, and I saw a lot of peers kind of go through that and everything, where they came from Buffalo public schools and they came from other schools and they really struggled and they couldn't quite get their footing, and they ended up becoming behavioral problems or having these other things happen or failing out or whatever. But before, because there weren't those supports in place. So like one of the things that we've been talking about a lot with our DE&I program now, and with a lot of the mentoring and things like that, are a part of wanting more diverse people is kind of helping them get here, right? So like I don't feel like no offense to anybody who's part of that school system, I don't feel like the Buffalo public schools adequately prepare children of color because of problems at home, because of other things, to get to where I am today,
right, or
to get to a lot of these positions. And without pipelines, without organizations kind of reaching back and helping them get there, I just don't think that'll happen. And you see, especially during COVID, I mean, you have so many households that they don't have internet, and you have kids doing school from home, right? And these are kids that are already behind. Like I remember being younger, and I had friends that went to Burgard and Bennett and different schools, and you go in those schools, and it's just very clear that they're behind. I don't know how they look now, but I remember at the time, like, there were some things that were set back, like metal detectors and stuff like that and everything that I just wasn't accustomed to. So, I feel like a big part of the problem is that, your zip code, which is predicated on how well your parents do, has a lot to do with how well you're educated, and it perpetuates because, a couple people, they do really well and they move and they move into nice neighborhoods and they get their kids a good education and it's fine. But the lion's share of people end up kind of staying where they grew up, and they get a poor education and their kids get a poor education and their kids after that. And, you just don't see the kind of growth. And a few people make it out, a few people who aren't, lawyers and doctors' kids get into city honors or something like that and they end up doing well. But for the most part, there's a lot of people that are left behind.
And you see it more as a result of some sociological elements. the family situation,
Absolutely.
wherever the case may be.
Yep.
A single parent trying to raise
Yeah.
3 kids.
Yep. And I mean, no, my mom's a single parent.
Right.
Yeah. And, fortunately, I had uncles and I had a grandfather and I had other people who, really cared a lot about me succeeding and they helped me. But a lot of people didn't have that. I mean, a lot of my friends didn't have that. I had a friend who, his mom was a single mom and she was really on her own. And, she was working a lot of hours to kind of make things happen. And while she was working, he was getting into stuff that he shouldn't have got into. And he ended up getting into some trouble. And, really, as a young black man, once you get into trouble, it's over.
How did things turn out for him, if you don't mind asking?
He's out of jail and kind of in and out and working regular jobs and stuff like that. But, his potential, if he had better, supervision and supports and everything, was a lot more than what he became. And you see that a lot. I have a lot of friends that, I went to school with who were in similar situations who, maybe they didn't go to jail or maybe it wasn't the extreme, but they just, never did what they could do. And, they just, I guess they do fine. They pay their bills and stuff like that and everything, but they weren't able to accomplish the things that they were definitely capable of because, it's not I don't think those people lack talent. I just think they lack opportunity.
Right.
And, opportunity is not evenly shared. That's where the equity piece comes in. There's just not equity and opportunity and then, ways out and things that you can do.
And you think it needs to start considerably younger?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're talking about like kids,
those formative years.
Those formative years. Like you have to because I mean, we were talking about this beforehand, right? Like, my boss right now went to Joe's and our CEO went to Canisius. At my last job, my boss went to Joe's. At the job before that, boss went and you see these elite private schools and these really good schools. Like, most of the lawyers that I went to law school with that were local, if they didn't go to Joe's or Sacred Heart or Canisius or one of those schools and everything, they went to Williamsville or Clarence or one of those schools. Or, if they went to Buffalo Public Schools, it was city honors. I didn't even go to school with any Cheektowaga Central graduates in law school. And it just shows, there are certain places where people are getting the education that puts them in these spots and there are other places where they're just not.
So, and you're a lawyer, but you obviously have thought considerably about this. When it comes to the education system in Buffalo and probably a lot of other places as well, what do you think the focus needs to be? What needs to be done? What can be done to change these realities?
I don't know.
Right.
Because, it's not money. Because Buffalo Public Schools, they spend more money than anybody else. I think more concentration on the home and the parents and the people, right? You see a lot, for example, the top shooting happened, right? And, all the businesses came in and they handed out a lot of money and they did a lot of charity work, right? Which is fine. That's great to do and everything. But, the way you could really make an impact is to employ some of those people, right? And, I see, I engage with a lot of organizations and everything, and they, go and they give out diversity scholarships and they participate in these programs and everything, but they don't hire any of these people. They don't even interview any of these people, right? So, especially in the law firm world, there are a lot of law firms who, participate in the programs and they give money to schools and they come in and they, rah-rah, and they put it in their newsletter. But then when it's time to hire people, when it's time to give people opportunities, they're not looking at people of color. And, it's fairly recently some law firms have started to do it because I think they're getting pressure from clients and things like that. But overall, there's just not really a push in those communities to hire people and to help them get ahead. And I think ultimately, if you start to build programs where you're hiring people and you're giving people good jobs, because people want to make a good living and support their family. And if they're able to do that with, a regular job where they don't have to work 3 jobs in 18 hours, I think you'll see them be able to spend a lot more time parenting and doing those kind of things. But, it's more than just, this horrible thing happened, let's give out money or let's, give money to the food pantries. It's like, why do people need to go to food pantries? Why do these things exist in the first place? And I think it's because opportunities, just, people don't have those opportunities.
Wrapping up here with Jason Daniels this morning on Buffalo What's Next. And we've heard this term used, you can't imagine what you can't see. Yep. That, there's not a lot of black professionals, especially like we've already gotten into in the city of Buffalo, in these segregated neighborhoods, these poor neighborhoods. What about that? What is there something there that, again, you're only one person, you're only one guy, but what about getting those people who have succeeded, getting them in front of other people. Doesn't matter. Well, does it matter to have Jason Daniels show up at the second grade class at a public school? Does it matter?
I think it matters a ton. I would have loved to have seen me when I was younger, and I think it's encouraging. I think a lot of people coming up, like, you don't see anybody succeed in that way that looks like you. So it's hard to imagine a path to do this thing that you've never seen anybody that looks like you do. So I think it's really helpful for people to go in and mentor and do things like that. Like, one of the things that I do is, I adjunct at ECC City sometime.
Okay.
And the reason that I do that is because, coming up, from pretty much third grade all the way through, like, I never had a professor or a teacher who was a person of color. So,
wow.
And that was one thing I was like, if I ever get into a position, I would love to change that. Like, I would love to, be that person. And I, go and I teach business classes, and afterwards people come up to me and they want to talk to me and they want to engage. And they're like, I've never, had a teacher who was a person of color, or I've never been around somebody, and you build those relationships. And I think that helps people understand that, wow, this is possible, or I can do this. And I think the earlier you engage people and just kind of, get their minds working that, there's a path for you, there's a way for you to get to where you want to go to, I think the earlier the better, because ultimately that'll at least have an impact on them. You don't know what their home situation or anything like that, but they'll understand that there's another path to success besides kind of what I see on TV or the people that I see that are famous and things like that.
Jason Daniels is Senior Legal Counsel at Catholic Health. He joins us this morning on Buffalo What's Next. Jason, thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It was great having you. We have more to come. This is Buffalo What's Next.
PBS Kids fun and educational content is available wherever you are in Western New York, whenever you want. Live stream the channel at wned.org/PBSKids, and while you're there, you can play games, watch videos from your favorite shows like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, Molly of Denali, and Alma's Way. And you'll find resources for parents and teachers. Visit wned.org/PBSKids today.
This is Buffalo What's Next, where we have conversations with the community about moving forward. To have your voice heard, press the Talk to Us button on the WBFO app, and we'll work to get your questions and comments on the air. Join us on Twitter at WBFO or email us at news@WBFO.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
And good morning. This is Dave Debo. Mark Overall is with us for this segment. He's president of the Buffalo Urban League's Young Professionals Group. We're going to be talking a little bit about what they do, but also, obviously, as we do on each episode, what he's seeing in the community, what groups might be out there working on repairing and helping. Mark, thanks so very much for being here.
Dave, thanks for having me.
How large is the Young Professionals Group?
In terms of members, probably around, it varies between 50 and 90. I don't think we've ever eclipsed 90 yet, but we're going to.
Part of the segment that Jay just had on before us was looking at how black people navigate positions of power in a corporate world that is oftentimes dominated more by whites. Does the Urban Professionals Group address that? Or?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the main benefits to a group like YP, which we call Young Professionals for short, is oftentimes it creates that after work space for majority black and brown professionals. Yes, I mean, but a lot of people are either one of the, a very select group, a small group of minorities in their workspace. So kind of navigating those spaces is actually one of the more common talking points.
How large is the problem or the disparity, the difference?
I mean, it varies. I mean, a lot of young professionals do work in the nonprofit space, so in that area, it's a little.
And that's an area that I imagine isn't quite as much of, if we dare say, an offender as the corporate world.
As the corporate world, but in the corporate world, when you're thinking about banks, when you're thinking about large conglomerates, it can get the numbers can be pretty low when it comes to black and brown representation.
What's the spin-off effect of that? If the numbers are low, what problem does that then create in the community?
Oftentimes focus on outreach, oftentimes approaches. Sometimes, perfect example, when a tragedy happens like May 14th,
sure.
Oftentimes there are companies and organizations that want to give to support, which is great. I mean, but oftentimes the people that they're either giving to or the people that are executing the support in a neighborhood like, the Jefferson Fruit Belt area don't look like the residents. And so things like that would be often mitigated or even eliminated by having more representation at the table when it comes to planning, saying, hey, you know what, if we're going to send people into this neighborhood, we're going to deploy people into this neighborhood, let's let those people look like the people that they're serving.
We've had mental health counselors on this program say that for them that has certainly been an issue.
It has.
That there just aren't enough practitioners of color for people to feel comfortable talking about really sensitive issues with someone who doesn't look like them.
Absolutely.
I also imagine it is an issue. They raised it this weekend. There was a summit this weekend on Saturday.
Yes.
Where they talked quite a bit about the idea that plans are good, progress is good. 4 months after the shooting, we have to do something. But darn it all, those plans, they said, have to come from people of color. That too often they're, I don't want to say imposed, but too often maybe they're brought to the table by others.
I would agree.
Okay.
I think oftentimes, and you can look throughout history, but if I don't want to get too contentious, but
right.
I will say if you look throughout history, I think it's always going to be problematic if you have a group saying, "Hey, we're from the outside, but we think
this is what you should do.
These are your problems, and this is how you should solve them." Right? And I think that'll be a little off-putting to any group of people.
Historically, is that a scenario that occurs more with people of color, do you think?
Well, yes. I mean, it's with the Native Americans, with the Africans, with black people in America, with I mean, Hispanic people. I mean, yes, it's been constantly a thing. So we try to. One thing I like about the Urban League is that we're not separatists when it comes to who our allies are. We like to form bonds and allyship with everyone. However, when it comes to the execution of how help and change should be implemented, we need to be at the forefront, and we ask to be at the forefront because we know the needs of our community. That's why, shout out to Thomas Buford and the Urban League staff for putting that resource center right at Jefferson and Glenwood, saying, hey, we're going to deploy these resources here because we know that this is ground zero and we know that this is a community that needs those extra services. And let me just say one more thing. YP was one of the groups that served as greeters at Johnny B. Wiley because people were coming in for the free mental health consultations.
Right, the day after.
The whole 2 weeks after. But the point is the clinicians didn't look like the residents. So they wanted YPs and other organizations like that to say, hey, welcome, we're glad you're here. While you're waiting, is there anything we can do for you because we look like the residents?
Yeah. Mark Overall is here. He's president of the Buffalo Urban League's Young Professionals Group. You just mentioned Thomas Buford. He's president of the Urban League. We've had him here on the program before. But for folks that didn't necessarily hear that program or don't want to go on and hunt it down online, give me the very quickest of recaps. What is the Urban League?
So the Urban League, let me just say it, the National Urban League was started in, I think, 1910, right?
Yeah,
and Buffalo chapter is an affiliate of it. And it was founded for two main reasons. The Great Migration, people moving from the South to the North and the Midwest and the West. And those people often coming from rural areas, farmers, sharecroppers, things like that, they needed jobs and housing. They were relocating from, rural Alabama, rural Georgia, rural Mississippi, moving to urban cities like Buffalo, New York City is where the headquarters is, places like that, Chicago, D.C. And it's okay. Now they're in urban areas, hence the Urban League, and they need a place to live, and they need places to work. So when the organization was founded, saying, hey, these are people overall, not everyone, of course. that coming from, blue collar farming backgrounds, they need to be trained on different areas of vocation. So it was founded to train them. So, and then Buffalo chapter came in the 1920s. We're coming up on 90 years. Our anniversary is coming up. So, and that's it. But it has since evolved past just housing and jobs to entrepreneurship, to first-time home ownership, to adoption and foster care, to basically trying to. I always nutshell it as saying the Urban League exists to give every person, regardless of their color, access to the American dream. And that is, a job that pays a decent wage, to live in a good neighborhood, to raise your kids in a good area, and to go to good schools.
Oh, you just opened up the box, though. Is there generally a lack of access? And I'm asking it somewhat rhetorically because I think I know the answer. But tell me to what extent or there is a lack of access to the American dream.
So when you look at it, and again, not trying to be too contentious, but I can talk about this all day. Oh, come on,
we like
sure.
Contentious. It's okay.
Okay, so when it comes to access, I think Cornel West said it best. He said, oftentimes we. America, the largest society, will say that, says, hey, you can be great, you can be this, you can be that. But the overwhelming majority of people are, have less than $100 a month after they pay their expenses. They're, a lot of people live from check to check. They're going to have, their kids are in bad schools, and they put up these celebrities like Barack Obama and LeBron James and say, and we want the vast majority and the black masses to live vicariously through these few celebrities. And so when you look at it as, yes, do we have more black faces in high places? Yes, we do. But like Dr. West said, but yes, if you take every black face in a high place, he has 100 cousins on both sides of his family that live below the poverty line. So that's why when you think about the access, you think about is success widespread or is it very selective and limited? And I think that the answer overwhelmingly is the latter.
All right. Now talk a little bit about generational wealth, because part of that discussion, the idea that there isn't access to the American dream, stems a little bit from the lack of generational wealth.
Absolutely. So it's I don't know if I was listening to a podcast or something the other day, and but it was an interesting. It was a black man and I think it was a white woman, and she was being very candid about her advantages in life. She said, "Yeah, when it was time for me to go to school, I went. I didn't have to pay for college. I don't have to worry about student loans. Mm-hmm. I mean, my parents, she said her parents made about $400,000 a year, so they were able to send her to a top tier school. And that was also, she gets out, she gets a job. She's not fighting from behind. She's not, I got a job making $70,000, great, but I got $100,000 student loan debt, right? So that's typically the case with more black and brown people. So when you talk about generational wealth, say you want to start a bakery or anything like that, you can say, hey, I got this idea. I want to start a business. Okay, cool. We're behind you. Here's $150,000 in seed money, because your parents and your parents' parents have that money passed down. And sometimes it's even through a life insurance policy, or it's through, when someone dies, regardless. I mean, but you're able to, because the wealth has been passed down, not just from the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, but through just normal people. Because the wealth has been passed down, you often have that head start versus most people I know, especially on the east side of Buffalo. If you say, hey, if you want to start a business and could you go to a family member to give you $50,000 to start it, most of them will say no.
And banks are willing to help out someone who has a pre-existing cushion.
Absolutely.
Rather than, hey, no, I've got a great idea, but I'm starting from scratch, Mr. Banker.
Absolutely.
That won't necessarily work. That won't cut it.
It doesn't go over as well. It's funny. Credit and lines of credit and business loans and even SBA loans are extended much more freely to people who, like you said, either have the cash in the bank or can show that they have that access to capital.
Now, part of the reason why I asked about generational wealth is not only because it's a good issue and we need to touch on it, but you're also part of a group called the Emerging Philanthropists of Color.
Yes.
Those two concepts in my head do not necessarily go together, because philanthropy requires the money to make the donation.
It does, but and that's exactly why EPC was founded. So underneath there's two umbrellas. Underneath the large umbrella of the Community Foundation of Greater Buffalo, you have another organization called CGLI, the Community of Giving Legacies Initiative.
Okay.
Right, and that is specifically for directing and funneling funds to Black and brown communities, right? So as a part of that, Emerging Philanthropists of Color was founded as under CGLI to say they wanted to change what philanthropy looks like, right? So what and this is, like I said, within the last 10 years. It's not an old organization, but what it is it's a group of people pooling our resources together. I think our dues are about $300, and we pool those resources together from all the members, and we award grants to nonprofits working in Black and brown communities. But the point is, it's to change the perception of what philanthropy is, because oftentimes, like you said, I don't have to. You think, when you think of philanthropy, you think of Kellogg, you think of the Community Foundation, you think of LeBron James, but EPC is saying, hey, we can take $300 from a bunch of average working people and put it towards
and aggregate it together so it has a greater impact down the road. Okay,
and that's what it's about.
And about how many people are part of that?
Ooh, members, I'd have to check. I don't know. I that's a good guess to have when you show Aaron Horde.
We'll add him to the list.
Yes, add him to the list. Horde, Hord. He's I think he's at the head of EPC right now, and he could give you more membership numbers. But we do what we can. I've been a part of the organization since I think 2018 or 2019, and it is one of the most fulfilling and impactful things that I've done in my recent years.
Where does the money trickle down to? What kind of organizations has it supported in the past?
Man, I think last year we give two $2,500 grants every year, and last year, was it the King Urban Life Center? And it was another place out in Niagara Falls. It might have been, I'm struggling. It's been a year ago. I'm struggling. Aaron will be a better place.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes, a little longer than that left. And I always like to try and close the program looking at specifically some of the community needs that now still linger, 4 months after the shooting. And if you're talking about philanthropy and addressing needs, I think we need to just take a quick minute or two and talk about what the biggest need right now is in the community. And answer it holistically, apart from any of the groups that you're involved in. Just what are you seeing out there that needs to be taken care of?
I would have to go. If we're talking holistically, I would probably start with education. And because I go to Bethesda, pastor's Bishop Michael A. Badger. He's big on education, and he said some things yesterday because he's big on education. And then I saw a show last night. There's a show on FX called Atlanta, and the episode showed a young kid who he started dancing in school, and then they thought, oh, he's a problem kid, let's hold him back. And then child services got called, and then they wound up shipping him to this horrible foster care place that wasn't a foster care. But the point is, the data has been overwhelmingly clear for years that Black and brown children are suspended at a higher rate, Black and brown children are expelled at a higher rate, Black and brown children are placed in in-school suspension at a higher rate. And the thing is, when you're taking kids out of school, you're putting them behind. Yeah. And the phrase, it's easier to create, I think strong children and to repair broken men, something like that.
Yeah.
I think if we're talking about holistically, we have to start with education, because we already took out so much from the school. We took out, auto mechanics and the electrical programs, plumber programs. You used to be able to graduate from high school with a skill or a trade that would provide for you and your family right out of high school. Taking those away and saying, hey, everyone has to go to college, knowing that there's a disparity in the amount of funds and wealth and and income that people have to send people to college. That ties right into what we said a minute ago about having student loan debt, putting off getting married, putting off buying your first home, putting off building your credit, because you already come into adult life with a horrible debt to income ratio. So I would say start with education, start with K through 12, even K through 6, and really focus on cutting out the suspensions, focus on putting more black and brown teachers in our classrooms. That's another thing, particularly black and brown male teachers. That's a huge issue. I think I can remember one in my entire public school life. I had one black male teacher. A lot of black female teachers, but one black male teacher.
Here in the Buffalo district?
I went to nothing but Buffalo public schools. I
Okay.
went to Olmsted and I went to Bennett. And it was nothing but, I went to school 82 as a kid, but for, middle school, Olmsted, and then for middle school, grade school, Olmsted, and then high school, I went to Bennett. I had one black male teacher. So it's a disparity. It's something that, and I'll say this, I don't want to get too, but you see the links that people go to bring people in. You look at NFTA. Oh, you can drive and earn your CDL. So say that about your teaching certification. Say we want to specifically, and they do, but we want to specifically increase the amount of black male teachers. We want to specifically increase the amount of black and brown minority teachers, black and brown teachers in the Buffalo public school systems, and we want to have those people also being at the table for administrative decisions and decisions that affect the day-to-day lives of our children.
Why are you specifically saying black male teachers? Is that because that's where the disparity is?
I say that's where the biggest disparity is, but I would say because I think for black boys, we often tend to look for representation in other areas. Black boys, we'll see it in music, we'll see it in rap, we'll see it in sports, we'll see it in all these other things. But most black men, young men, we say, who is a black male in your community that you look up to? Now, fortunately for us, we've had Byron Brown in office for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
So, but outside of that, most people would be hard-pressed to name a black male teacher.
And every black boy who's looking up to LeBron James or Barack Obama isn't necessarily going to be president or a basketball star.
Of course not.
So there's a void in there of achievable role models.
Exactly.
Okay.
But someone who's going every day, going into a classroom, affecting and molding the minds of tomorrow, that's something very proximate, and that's something that a lot of people can aspire to.
All right. Last little bit here. Tell me what I gave you a magic wand. Wave it. All the problems go away. But if you were able to do just one thing, and you kind of maybe answered it when you said education is the priority, what would be the one thing that, man, you'd love to see achieved?
It's funny, I ask that question a lot. I know it's cliche, but I'd have to go with I'd have to go with hatred. I think if everybody showed more love, I would say I'd eliminate racism, but even beyond that, I'd say hatred, because if you eliminate hatred and there was really a sincere and genuine love for mankind, then that would eliminate racism, that would eliminate classism, that would eliminate sexism, that would eliminate homophobia, that would eliminate all of these other things. So I think that if we had this somewhat of a utopian society, which I know is unrealistic, it would just create a system and a society and a world where everyone could achieve and succeed.
Is there a baby step along the way? A lot of people have said more integration, more people from, the example I always use, forgive me, people in arcade, more people from arcade having a meal on the east side, that kind of thing.
I think that the baby step is we have to have honest conversations, and we should not allow racism to prevail under the law. I say, as someone who has a legal background, I say that when we create laws as a part of a social contract about how human beings should treat each other, right? And I think that when you have instances where you have evidence of people being mistreated, people being discriminated against, people being the subject of disparate treatment, I think the law should correct that. And I don't think that we should delay in that correction. I don't think that we should try to hide that correction. I don't think that we should try to wash over that correction. I think that we need to call a spade and say, look, this is an issue. This is what the law says. Everyone's treated equally, and we need to take steps to rectify it immediately.
All right, Mark, thanks so much for being here.
Dave, thanks for having me.
Mark Overall, president of the Buffalo Urban League's Young Professionals Organization. That'll do it for this episode. You are listening to WBFO and WBFO HD1 Buffalo, WOLN Olean, and WUBJ Jamestown, your NPR stations. I'm Dave Debo. Thanks for listening.